Welcome to MAP, the bi-weekly market access podcast hosted by me, Dr. Stefan Walzer. I am the innovator of Market Access 4.0 and a health economist by training and working in the fields of market access, reimbursement, pricing, and health economics since 2004. Discover Market Access 4.0 and unveil the future with our innovative solutions. Max Insights, our fast and easy AI-based reimbursement planning platform. Dobo, our new revolutionizing way of creating reimbursement dossiers across the globe with the first and only dossier writing AI bot. Cubo, our new AI-based objection handling platform. And Waffle, train with Waffle's virtual reality genius in an immersive environment and with an AI-based counterpart. We are Market Access 4.0. So check out our website, marketaccess4-0.com. And now let's dive into the current discussions, processes, and trends in market access across the globe. So welcome to another episode of the Market Access podcast. I'm very happy to have Adrian Kielhorn today in the show. And whoever doesn't know Adrian, please introduce yourself very quickly, Adrian.
Thank you for the opening. I'm Adrian Kielhorn. I've worked in health economics, marketing, sales, and market access for so many years. It becomes painful to remember. Must be 25 years by now. So various aspects, always on the pharmaceutical side, and written in Health Economics Handbook early in my career, and a few years ago, the Market Access Guide.
Exactly. And that's also, I think, one of the key reasons why we're sitting together. I mean, besides, and we quickly spoke as well beforehand, I mean, my first question will be around inspiration, but just between us, and nobody's listening to us, right? Okay. I mean, you have also inspired, obviously, myself to think early in my career around, let's say, thinking where to go. So it was also around leadership, etc. when we first came together. So I was very happy to see basically when you also published the book, The Market Access Guide. So coming back to the book, I mean, what inspired you to write that book? And what gaps in the field of market access were you aiming to address maybe with that book as well? As you have said, you have seen a lot in the pharma world.
There are two key reasons that prompted me to write this book. One of them is there's always a little bit of a fight within me. Is market access a function, or is it more an attitude, a general perspective? And depending on the day of the week, I choose one over the other. But you can already see it's probably a little bit of both. So most companies have market access functions, or most pharmaceutical companies have dedicated market access functions. But for me, it is important that this focus on drug development to ensure that drugs not only get approved, but at the end get in the hand of the appropriate patients. That's what market access ultimately stands for. And that is a vision that needs to be shared, not just by the people working in the market access function, but across all stakeholders involved in the drug development. If they don't do that, it's going to be a long fight. And, very often market access function, because it's small and limble and always gets involved only at the very end, is always on the short end of the stick. And all the key decisions are made in people, from the development part organization where you have 20 people in the room and they just outvote whatever market access needs are on the table. So this is the first reason. The second one is, I know as a consultant, you always say you got to plan ahead. So as a market access specialist, you need to think ahead. Mm-hmm. So you need to develop a passion for being at the end of a journey where everybody else is still on. So you're already at the finish line. And the finish line is not when the phase 3 trial reads out. The finish line is when you have finished your negotiation of the access of the drug. So the patient population and the price have been agreed on. There, as a market access specialist, you have to be 10 or 20% of every day at work. And then from then you plan backwards. How do you make sure you get there so that you have what you need at the time of negotiation and not at the time of data readout? And that is really something that you got to train and work on. I don't think you learn this in any courses or something, but I thought that showing how many aspects are involved in ensuring market access at the end is successful gives people inspiration to start thinking about more at the end of the journey, at the beginning, and not just what's in front of them from day to day.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, I can still remember, I think, when I was being called, when I entered meeting rooms, oh, the party crasher is coming, right? But that basically describes exactly what you said. I mean, you might be coming in, and it's not that you're crashing parties or whatever. You're just thinking really towards the full end of the whole story or the whole journey, as you said. I mean, a lot of time, but that helps also when you obviously then simply explain what that kind of impact might have, right? But with the end, towards the kind of current start where maybe the discussion are currently on, right? Which could be in the medical development, let's say, could be as well around, let's say, I don't know, regulatory or label text discussion or the likes. That's very good. So that's already a nice kind of overview. And obviously, let's say whoever has not yet read the book, I recommend to buy it as well. Maybe you could give them as well a bit of a taste. I mean, what are the key, maybe 3 lessons you would say which are important from the book, or let's say generally from what you have written out there, If somebody would be thinking to either buy the book or if they have read the book, what should they basically keep in mind?
Well, to make it easy, and that was an idea that came from my co-author, Ruth Whittington, who leads a communications agency based out of New Zealand. We included a couple of pitfalls, and they turned out to be one of the key areas of interest for readers, because there we show how things went south and what you need to do to make sure it doesn't happen. And these are common mistakes, like disclosing a preliminary price, which then the moment it's out of the box, there's no preliminary price in a company, for example. Everybody uses it and runs with it. It's like a genie. Once out of the bottle, you can never take it back. So I think that makes it easy for the reader. But the key insights, I'd have 3. The first one is, when it comes to the value story of any product you're working on, you have to develop that yourself. Yes, every consultant offers to do it for you, and they probably give you ideas. But at the end, you need intimate insights and familiarity with a product that you cannot delegate. So it's really, it's on everybody working market access to own this and drive it. The second one is what I mentioned on earlier. So you always have to think 3 to 5 years ahead, and whether the evidence you're generating as part of your registration trial or pivotal trial is good enough to defend the value at the time of negotiation. And that's not the same as data readout. In many markets, there are 2 years between. So you got to really think long ahead and imagine how the world will look like 3, 4, 5 years from now. And is the clinical evidence still as valuable then as you think it is today? And then the third one is negotiation. Okay, so when you're part of the clinical development team, there's so many different functions, and everybody has a long shopping list of items they want included in the phase 3 trial. And if everybody gets what they need, you're probably going to end up with a trial that takes 10 years, has 5 active comparators, and has, samples taken of patients every other week. So it's not going to work. So, which means you have to learn to negotiate, meaning you need to really find out what's key when it comes to demonstrating the value of the product and what's nice to have. And nice to have, you may have to trade with or let go. You just got to make sure that what's really key when it comes to the product value, you hold on to that, because what you don't include in your phase 3 trial or phase 2, if you get approval with that, what you don't put in at the beginning, it's too late to put in at any other time point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can only agree. I think with the 3 kind of key takeaways, I think that I'm a consultant, but I would fully still even agree with the first one. I mean, you need to internalize your value story. I mean, it's okay if somebody's maybe doing it, but if you do not internalize it and basically really live with it, own it, you are not behind it. And then you will lose, and also the steps afterwards, what you were just thinking. I mean, future ahead kind of planning, the thinking about 3 to 5 years, and also the negotiations. I think that's absolutely fully agree with you.
To add a little bit more flavor to this, Stefan, if you have a value story where you can replace the name of the product with another one and the story still flows, you don't have a value story. You know, you have a generic flows of wishful thinking or hopes and aspiration. A value story has to be really customized to your product, to the indication, with a clear, where the audience gets a clear sense of what is it that you're adding compared to what's already on the market. So that is often a test that I do internally. And more than half the times, you probably have to go back to the drawing board and customize it to make sure the fit is better.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I mean, which is not that easy, right? I mean, not even if you have maybe a kind of team and discussing about it. Sometimes, I mean, we have been in those meetings and you just think you have a good or maybe even a great value story. And then you maybe do a bit of prompting or maybe checking with somebody outside of that team. And you just recognize, yeah, it could also fit with another product, or it's not clear to them, or maybe it's just too loose, right? Not too directive to as well the product, and maybe as well the end target in mind, right?
That's true. It's not an easy task, and you got to keep it easy and simple.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you have visions that when you put them on paper, you know, it's a big paragraph, and then a lot of people struggle to really see the essence of what this product is adding. And then if you know, this is the modern day and age, you have children too, you know, it's hard for them to watch any movie that lasts an hour and a half. It's got to be short and quick. And what's the point? So, you know, if your value statement is not a short and concise one, your overvalue story is not, you know, easily understood, it's really hard to communicate that, or for the audience to appreciate what is it that you're bringing. So sometimes less is more.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, to that point, I can still remember, and maybe you know that as well. Maybe you remember the movie Philadelphia, probably beginning of the 90s or whatever. I think there was also that lawyer. Yeah. And he was always saying, explain it to me as I'm 3 years old. You know, it's not 3 years, it's maybe not 8 years, but it's basically coming back to the point, as you said, make it simple, which brings me also a bit to the skill set. I mean, I would also say, I think the book is basically emphasizing maybe becoming a leader or being a leader and maybe getting even a better leader in market access. So there are a lot of skills as well related to that. I mean, you mentioned negotiation. We can maybe add project management. You mentioned that as well, getting into a meeting with different functionalities. Maybe also a point that, let's say, market access people also need to understand various other functions, at least from a top level perspective, right? Like statistics, like health economics, like, I don't know, clinical development, etc. So what are the kind of key, let's say, skills you would say somebody would need to develop in order to become a really successful market access leader? Because ultimately, you cannot be perfect in all of those skills you would maybe want to do and want to, let's say, be able to have as a key market access leader.
Well, the first one is always humor, because, you know, every time you work in a complex function, sometimes it's good if you can, you know, just take a break, laugh, chill, relax. So I think a certain sense of humility is always good, because even though the goal you're working on is a very important one from the perspective of patients, you know, don't get too overly worked up on that, because every function thinks like that. Okay. And sometimes it's good to respect everybody's value system. You know, safety wants to make sure we have as much data as possible to show the drug is safe. And, you know, so various functions have their goals. If you put yours too high, it puts everybody else down. So a little bit of humility helps. You mentioned negotiation. Yeah, definitely a good one. I think also the ability to see where are individuals good and where they're not. And I think this is probably where also consultants like yours can come in, Stefan, because no one is good at everything. but it's good if you know where your weak points are, and then you can outsource that. Not everybody who works in market access needs to be a biostatistician by training, but it's good to understand how biostatisticians think and operate, and how they plan, and by when they need to have what, so that they're happy. Patient centricity, for me, is a very important skill set, one that has even increased since I wrote the first edition of this book, because you got to really look at the benefit a drug is offering from the perspective of patients. And very often we think what we do is relevant to patients, but we don't engage patients directly to validate this. And I do it now in my work a lot. And the amount of surprises I learned, Stefan, where I thought I have the right perspective, and I was a little bit off, or off a great deal, really eye-opening. So in my development processes right now, I engage with patients directly, or with patient groups directly, a lot. And it's really helped me get a better understanding for what matters to patients. So when I go later and with the data package to payers, I'm in a better position to say, well, this is important to patients because A, B, and C. To give a bit of flavor for this, when we look at disease burden, for example, to understand, what is happening with the disease and how big of an issue is a certain disease for an insurance company or for society, we usually focus on what's reimbursed, what's paid for. And since I started working in rare disease, I learned that there's a lot of expenses that are not captured by health insurance, but that impact patients a lot. And what's even adding to that is the family and caregivers are affected as well. So such as the patient, it's the whole ecosystem surrounding the patient that is affected. And the Every Life Foundation published a landmark article, I think in 2022, where they looked at the total, the direct and the indirect and the non-medical costs. And they found that about half of the total economic burden are these non-medical, these indirect costs that are never measured and that are usually invisible. And I think to bring that one out is important, because then you can go to payers and say, if we stop a disease from progressing, from patients from losing their eyesight even more, we keep them where they are, that is a benefit not just for patients, but for the whole ecosystem around. And so it can become part of the benefit, the value story. But if you don't measure it, you don't engage patients to learn about it, you'll never be able to tell it.
That's very good. No, absolutely. I mean, I think especially the last one, I think that's a very interesting one. I think you just mentioned, I mean, we're always at these discussing about patient relevant endpoints, which is a lot driven by definitions of different payers, whether Germans or French or whatever. I think doesn't matter. But ultimately, this is a lot of times, as you have as well just said, coming from endpoints which have already been submitted and assessed by payers. And sometimes, and you just mentioned also the very special case of orphan diseases, that's not always captured or not even known at that point of view. But I would still be curious. I mean, you just said you're involving patient and patient groups. Is that, let's say, in the early days of the value messaging or the value story development, or is that across the kind of whole, let's say, life cycle until you have let's say the value dossier in a way even already developed? I mean, how could one, let's say, foresee, how would you, or how do you recommend maybe to as well involve patient and patient groups in that journey?
So there are a lot of touch points. At one point in development, you probably need to get an understanding of the patient journey. And you can buy patient journeys from consultants and off the shelf, but to get patients into the room and have a discussion with them and learn from them how their journey was is so much more powerful. We have a group within the company I work in, and they are responsible for this, and they have excellent connections. Just to give you an idea of how impactful this is, Stefan. So we had a patient visiting our office, and the patient was diagnosed with neuromyelitis optica, spectrum of diseases, so NMOSD, which is the disease which affects your eyesight and your overall mobility, the nerves in your spine. So you lose the ability to walk and to see. Quite debilitating. Okay, so the lady was in the room. It's a predominantly female disease. She was in the room, and I asked her, how's your quality of life? And she said, oh, it's great. It's awesome. So she needs a dog to walk. She can't travel by herself. She has difficulty readings, and she can only walk short distance. Okay? But her quality of life is good. So why is this relevant? If we conduct a clinical trial with these patients in it, what we measure is what happens during these 6 months or a year in the clinical trial. And when patients with such a disability in the trial rate their quality of life awesome, how can you improve that with any drug? Okay? So what we need to do is capture the life of patients before they were diagnosed, which we can do in clinical trials. So we can go to payers and say, this is the journey of patients. And by the time they're in the trial, they're already here and there. And most of the patients are happy for any day. They still have a little bit of vision left. So quality of life measurement as part of the clinical trial may not be the best way to capture the benefit our drug could offer to these patients. So, Lodi, that was a tricky one.
No, I can imagine. And I can only agree, I think, what you have just said. I mean, we had once a product or a client as well with whom we also went to the GBA. And one of the key first questions the GBA was not even asking to us and to the company. It was directed to the physicians. Tell us exactly how we could think about such a patient. I want to see the patient in front of me. And it was young kids with disabled, and it was a product against drooling, right? So they understood, let's say, the measures and the question and the instruments which were included and the significance from a statistical perspective. But the key for them was really, what is the real benefit for the patient if they drool a bit or a bit more or the whole day, whatever. And that is exactly, I mean, as you have just said, I mean, in this case, it was not directly coming from the patient themselves. They were young kids, but it was basically coming from caregivers and the physicians. So it can change even a decision there. So that's really an important consideration. So probably a very good consideration also for other market access managers.
True. So there was one example, but there are many. So every time we do a study or a survey or try to understand either how to measure the disease better, we involve patients and part of the steering committee. So we capture the insights early on. Yes, of course, we do pilot testing with any instruments anyway, but the one-on-one feedback is always helpful because you learn something that we would have missed had we just relied on a pilot testing of 10 patients, and did it all work out, yes or no?
Yeah. Very insightful. Absolutely. Absolutely. So this was already a very much kind of real world, let's say, challenge as well. I mean, payers, patient impact on the strategy, etc. But strategy is obviously one point. And you also just said, I mean, you need to think ahead of time, right? You need to plan. So taking that back as well a bit to your book, how would or could maybe your book equip market access professionals navigating then also the quite complex healthcare systems and maybe even negotiations with different stakeholders, which are happening obviously not now when they start planning and putting, for example, the RCT together, but maybe in 2, 3, 4, 5 years of time. How could the book also help them in that kind of endeavor?
Well, we try to outline by development stage what are the things that you need to consider from a market access perspective. The relevance will differ depending on the specific therapeutic area you're going into, but you should look at all these items and go through and say, okay, when am I going to capture this? Is this relevant? Is it very important? So you have these integrated into your overall plan, because remember, you need the help of your cross-functional stakeholders to bring many of these deliverables to life. So to have a plan and to help them, understand why you're doing this early on is definitely important. And and of course, we all know the real timelines. I mean, what we put in there in the book is the theory. Very often, you don't have as much time to prepare for something than you want because the phase 3 trial is accelerated, or other areas come to play where instead of a year and a half to prepare, all of a sudden you have half a year. So if you have your plan in your hand that lists what is really important to capture and when to capture and how to capture it, you can respond quicker to these constantly changing timelines.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a good point as well. I mean, we're already speaking a bit about, let's say, obvious planning and, let's say, taking the future into consideration. We've now spoken a lot about, let's say, the roles of market access, let's say, responsibles within projects and in, let's say, product compound. But what about the role of the market access experts themselves? I mean, where would you see the role, and how would that maybe evolve as well in the next, maybe, I don't know, 5 to 10 years? I mean, you have seen as well a lot in the last 20 plus years. I mean, how that role really expanded as well into bigger responsibilities and the like. But where and how would you see maybe that kind of role getting maybe by 2030, 2035?
That's a good one. Personally, I think patient centricity, so generate data that really captures the perspective of patients, will become more and more important simply because the financial pressure on the healthcare system is not going to go away. And to make sure that the intervention really addresses a need that patients have, rather than correcting a clinical parameter, a surrogate marker will play a bigger role. There is a particular challenge to rare diseases, an area where I work exclusively, because very often in rare diseases, we don't have the endpoints that have been designed to best capture the benefit of patients. We borrow endpoints from other more common diseases, and then sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So there's a challenge that I'm working on every day. The other area is equity. So the half of the rare diseases are affecting children, very often very young children. Because many rare diseases have a very small patient pool, it is not the business case for drug development is a very different one. You've seen the price tags of, for some of the gene therapies of several 100,000 or million for a drug that's given once but can cure a disease. So we always think of large diseases and maybe short-term use to correct something. Very often there is little understanding that if you want to develop or provide incentives to develop cures for many of the rare diseases, you need to find a different model or to capture the value, and you need to be able to accept the differences and how they're priced to make it viable for some pharmaceutical company. So this is under the umbrella of equity. So I think patients with rare diseases should also have the access to at least one approved treatment option. At the moment, many of the estimated 7,000 rare diseases, physicians play around, they experiment with a mix of immunosuppressant therapies and steroids, hoping that whatever cocktail they choose will offer patients some benefit. So my hope is that this, in the future will play a greater role, which puts a big burden on market access specialists, because we are working in an environment where often not even the regulatory pathway is clear. So let alone the market access pathway. And now you need to be ready to negotiate reimbursement with endpoints that are not as solid as you'd like them to be, with a small number of patients where you start doing subgroup analysis, everything falls apart. So everything that you'd like to have, and you usually have when you think of larger diseases, you don't have in an environment that becomes more and more critical on the drug value. So to really bring out the patient perspective here is not just a nice to have, it is a must have, but you need to make sure you prepare your payers for the fact that, in this therapeutic area, the challenges you face in generating evidence is not one that money can solve. It is one that is linked to the disease being rare and not having the right endpoints, for example. And so I think bringing this mindset to payers will play a greater and greater role over the next 10 years.
Yeah, which is not the most easy task, right? I mean, as we know, payers like certainty and not uncertainty, which obviously gives a bigger, or maybe has a bigger kind of impact, especially in the orphan disease area, where maybe you can simply not, let's say, develop such a big kind of clinical development plan as with other kind of disease areas. Maybe, as you said, the endpoints are not accepted, maybe could not even be developed in the way, and you have a very small sample size, even in the overall patient population. So a lot of different reasons. And then obviously still you have that business kind of question. Is it as well something valuable for companies to invest? Meaning, is the price tag maybe the right one?
Yeah, and that really has implications. I mean, I mentioned NMOSD as one disease.
Mm-hmm.
So very often when we were capturing the value of this disease, we developed an economic model. Mm-hmm. And we measured in our clinical trials EDSS, mm-hmm. which is, if you work on multiple sclerosis, it's the pivotal tool to measure the advancing disability of patients. And it measures the benefit drugs can offer to a patient with this disease. Because many neurologists, they treat multiple sclerosis, they also treat patients with NMOSD. Mm-hmm. So in NMOSD, the scale doesn't work really well mm-hmm. because a vision as an impairment is only captured to mm-hmm. a small degree in the scale. So it didn't really correlate really well with our clinical data. But payers said, yeah, you know what? I would like your economic model to be powered by EDSS because that's one variable I know. And when we say, yeah, but I'm not sure this is the best for capturing the benefit, then they say, do it anyway. And then you have results which you think is an underrepresentation of the true benefit. And the payers look at you and say, okay, let's talk about the value here. I don't see a lot, but let's have this discussion anyway. So it's really... seriously, but this is what it means working, particularly rare disease, with payers that usually working on large diseases only, and all of a sudden see something they don't really understand, and they migrate back to something that they're familiar with. Exciting work every day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, Adrian, we're getting a bit towards the end of that let's say, session. Mm-hmm. Normally I end basically with more an outlook into the future. We covered that already on purpose. I mean, this time I would rather want to end a bit towards maybe young professionals mm-hmm. in the field of market access. And of course, at least that is how I, let's say, educated myself and still do it by reading books. And we just discussed about, let's say, we have kids and maybe you have to have that a bit shorter, which might not be the book, but maybe they can listen to the podcast. Yeah, exactly. So getting back to the podcast now. So how would you say would your book, The Market Access Guide, basically serve as a kind of roadmap maybe for young professionals towards their journey in a market access environment? As we know, there are different roles, different functions, different expertise mm-hmm. you can as well develop. So how could that basically be a kind of roadmap for that?
Well, I hope it serves as an inspiration for some development ideas because of the cross-functional interdependence of market access as a function. I hope it serves as an inspiration for young professionals. When they think about their career development, they don't think of, I'm going to start a market access and go all the way up in the organization, but they think more horizontally and say, market access is a nice function, but maybe I want to work in epidemiology, or I do half a year secondment in health economics and outcomes research, so where the evidence is generated, or I go into strategic or operational pricing, or in other functions that are involved in the drug development process. So simply for them to understand and appreciate the different value systems of all these important functions that play a role in the drug development process, that'll make it easier for them later to look at the challenges from different perspectives and come up with a solution that is not just optimal for market access, but for other functions as well, meaning everybody supports the consensus and implements it. So if that is an inspiration, I'm already happy.
So that is a very good kind of end of that show. I think we started with inspiration. We end with inspiration. which is great. Thank you for your time. Thanks a lot for your insights, Adrian. That it was good fun. And talk to you soon.
Got it. Thanks so much, Stefan. Much appreciated. All the best.
What an inspirational podcast session today with Adrian Kielhorn. I know him already quite a long time, and of course I think he put a lot of experience as well in the book. Just very briefly as well to mention, before somebody would go on directly to Amazon, the book can be bought in the Amazon US store as hard copy. Otherwise it's available as the Kindle version just for you to remember. We'll also put that into the show notes. Otherwise, I think probably very important to mention, especially during the kind of, let's say, podcast session, I think the market access function, as Adrian said a couple of times, is obviously a very complex kind of part within a team of development and even beyond in the pharmaceutical world. I think as Adrian and whoever knows him as well said, humor helps a lot, of course, but of course it's not only humor, it has a lot of different other things like negotiation skills, like project management, like others. And I think you mentioned a lot of times patient centricity. That is a key thing. He said it was an eye-opener. And I think ultimately we're always discussing, and that's also what I said in the podcast, about patient-relevant endpoints, which is probably more a kind of theoretical, kind of defined and per definition being taken into the more complex area of market access. But ultimately, what does it mean? It basically means what is important for the patient. And we have as well brought up 2 or 3 different really good examples. I think that's also something really important to take into consideration when working in the market access field. Beyond that, I would again maybe quickly repeat his key takeaways from the book, but also about the experience. And I can only agree with those. I think one is obviously the value story, own the value story. Secondly is really thinking ahead. You need to have already the end in mind. And thirdly, it's really as well develop negotiation skills, not only for payers when you would really sit with payers at the table, but it's also and especially around the planning within a pharmaceutical company, as obviously different functions have different objectives and goals, and everybody wants to meet those. Otherwise, again, I can only recommend buy the book. It's a really great one with a lot of expertise to be added to everybody working in that field. That was an episode of MAP, the Market Access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. MAP is available every second week with a new episode, so watch out. And in case you might have questions, contact me directly and or visit our website on www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de.